Board games. We might be talking about automatic resource growth, but we're not gonna shout. Sometimes you need your things to grow, and hopefully it won't stop the game from flowing, and we will keep these things escalating, and we will keep the game bringing some resources into it. But is it bringing too much to keeping it to the gaming?
Oh dear.
Whatever it is for every hour, 10 a.m. is UK time. Time for Betty Beats and Board Game Blether. And today we are chatting about automatic resource growth.
Yes.
Why are we doing this, Alan? What is this all about?
Well, it's because we've run out of auctions, Bez. It's just because we've run out of auctions.
I mean, what is this whole series? So,
yes. Well, we're looking at game mechanics from A to Z, from Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design by Geoffrey Engelstein and Isaac Shalev, as mostly reflected in the Board Game Geek list of what they term mechanics, but what this terms mechanisms. Let's not go there, though. So that's what we're looking at, and it's this is the last A, I think. So I think next time we'll actually move off the A's, which is interesting.
Yeah, we started off with acting, action drafting, action points, action queue, action retrieval, action timer, action event, advantage open alliances. That seems so long ago. And then there is majority, area movements, area impulse, auction compensation, auction bidding, auction dexterity, auction Dutch priority, auction English, which I made a game about, which was quite auction fixed placement, auction multiple lots, auction once round, auction sealed bid, auction turn order until pass. And I feel like I know auctions quite well now.
That could be a wrap.
And now, automatic resource growth. Yes, and there's still a lot left to go.
Yes, it's a labor of Hercules, probably. A labor of love, anyway.
Yes, because we love games and we love talking about mechanics, and it seems like a good thing to do, and it still seems like a nice thing to do, and
it makes us design new games as well, which is quite interesting.
So we are going to explore exactly what this means, but it's basically about bringing new stuff into the game. It's a little bit of bookkeeping, but we'll get into that in just a minute. First of all, let's talk about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights. Recent highlights. Yesterday, I had, as I occasionally do, although I don't do it daily as I originally planned, I sent something to my Facebook group with Charlie is part of it, and saying, hey, here's the priorities today. My self-care was on the top of that, and I did do all the stuff at least on that bit. Like, I mean, I showered and went outside and had some relatively healthy food. And but there's a lot of stuff undone. But let's talk about what was actually done. I think the highlights for me were seeing the ducks. It's like going out and seeing them bob around on the water. And the other small achievement that I did was I messaged everyone who's going to be on my 1000th episode to double check that they are still okay with the times, and so I can nail down the things, because that's just, I believe, in 2 weeks and a wee bit.
Yes, it's going to rush up on us very rapidly. Yes. Well, I mean, I must admit I haven't actually gone out for enough walks yet.
But you went for some walks yesterday, right?
Not yesterday. No, we didn't actually go for a walk yesterday. No, we should have done. But I've been meaning to. The trouble is, where we're living, we can't just go. We have to drive somewhere first, because from here there's no little paths to just walk down directly from the house. Because we're on a really, really busy, narrow fenland road. So people don't walk along there because it's too dangerous. So it's more
literally nowhere that you could walk outside the house without driving first.
That's right, pretty much. So it means that I probably ought to be doing yoga and things like I used to do, but I haven't got back into that routine. However, that's something we'll have to rectify later on today. Yes. So highlights for me, we actually completed, Charlie and I, and Charlie being the expert at jigsaws, we completed the Kingmaker jigsaw. So here we have a couple of pictures of it. It was
5,000? No, not 5,000. 500 pieces.
It's 1,000-piece jigsaw. Now, the interesting thing about this jigsaw, briefly, is that it's literally just taken from Matt Edwards' cover painting, which is really, really gorgeous. As you can see, it's a gorgeous picture. It's not optimized for jigsaws at all. So if you look at those edge pieces, if you look at the edges, I'm not sure I can really, can I actually, I'm not sure, can I zoom in? I'm not sure if I can zoom in. Ah, there we go. If you look at those edges, they are almost identical all the way around. So yeah, so the edges are quite tricky.
And also the top left bit, just underneath the logo, where it's very black.
Yes, there are, and the bottom right bit where it's very dark green. There's lots of very similar pieces, color. The bit that I started with the Kingmaker word because it's nice and easy to do, and then I moved on to the edges, which was a very taxing. So I would say that it's a really interesting and fun jigsaw, but it does require quite a lot of patience, and you mustn't let the frustration take you over, or you'll just throw it away. No, it's very good. It was fun. It's definitely a puzzle with a capital P. Absolutely.
Nice.
But, nice. And I also got this game, the Pratson Austerlitz 1805, which was a Kickstarter I backed in February 2021.
Wow.
And it's now actually arrived. So I've got it onto the table. It's a 2-player war game with it says medium to high solitaire suitability. But it's one of those war games where there's no actual solitaire rules. You just play both sides. But it's by the legendary, to wargamers, Peter Perler, who is a, shall we say, an older game designer like me. But he is a professional war game designer. He works for the American Department of Defense, I think, and various.
Oh, wow. So proper war games that are being used for the military to research and learn how military things will work.
That's exactly it. And he's done a Napoleonic one. This is, Battle of Austerlitz 1805.
Well, I have a lot of fun with that. Yeah. And let's move on to brilliant thing. This is a little thing which is brilliant. I think that growth in general. Let's talk about growth.
Growth, yes.
Both personal growth and also growth of, flowers blooming, trees growing up. I think that things decay, and there can be a feeling of, yes, all things go. Ultimately, we are attacked by entropy, and we turn into nothing and dust in a million years.
We're all star stuff. All star stuff. But growth it's spring. It's the time of growth, of new growth. So that's good. I'm looking out at the grass growing unmown here. But yeah, it's good. And actually yesterday,
you see the wild things unfettered,
just doing their stuff. We had our first goldfinches in the garden here. We hadn't realized that we had 4 goldfinches just came in and brightened up the garden for us. That was really lovely.
Why would you say that growth is a brilliant thing?
Well, I think because it's, if you like, it's kind of the opposite of entropy. It's change, but in a good way.
I mean,
or it can be, at least,
necessarily good and destruction necessarily bad? I mean, that doesn't seem right, because sometimes there's an old crumbly building and destroying it makes way for new stuff.
But you're only destroying it in order to grow something new.
Allows things to come into being. Maybe that's ultimately it. And if we agree that things existing is good, then maybe more things existing is even better, and that's basically what growth is.
I think there are good types of growth and bad types of growth. You don't necessarily want rampant growth, but you want not control. You want to have growth which gives new meanings to your existence.
I mean, like, you
gives
could
you more
argue,
enlightenment.
I mean, you could argue that the growth of COVID is a really bad thing. Most humans would.
I think we probably would argue that, yes.
I mean, I would say that from the perspective of a human, the growth of any virus that, you know, damages our health is a bad thing.
I would
But
say
and so it feels like growth is a very subjective thing. And so then we get into the case by case scenario of, is this thing a good thing to have around? Which I guess leads us into, I mean, this is the most middling, brilliant thing that I've done. But I guess we say that, you know what, growth is brilliant, but it's very situational when we actually examine it a little bit.
Very contextual, yes. But I think because it's spring, we should be focusing on the positive growth. Yes, plants and animals, and
I like flowers. I like having things
reproduction.
to eat. I like, you know, garlic.
Garlic, yes.
Garlic doesn't exist without growth.
This is true.
And then
I think that all plants really rely on growth, and animals, to be honest. Let's be fair.
I get to be the one to put the garlic into my mouth and destroy it. Anyway, so let's move on to our main topic. As always, do feel free to comment, ask questions, and please follow. But if I get to the basically, how is it defined, and how does Board Game Geek define it?
Right. Well, now this is an interesting one, because I've got the book, as I always have. The book actually says automatic resource growth. Resources held by a player will automatically grow over time. And that's it. But BGG does not define it in that way. It defines it as the automatic increase of resource triggered by a particular conditional, deterministic, not random game state. So the BGG definition doesn't even say resources held by a player. It's any resource, whereas the book definition is specifically resources held by a player.
I mean, I would trust. I mean, I'm going to actually check with Jeff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev. Maybe send them if they respond. But my understanding is that BGG, they rewrote things, and there was some, you know, maybe gaps in their knowledge, things that they overlooked. And so I would assume that the BGG definition was a slight improvement.
I don't know. The thing is, if you look at the BGG definition, this could be this could overlap quite a lot with income, couldn't it? Automatic. I mean, one of the examples they use is the $200
as a
counter monopoly. Oh, sorry, that is a counterexample. Excuse me, that is a counterexample. Yeah, that's very true.
Because it has to be conditional.
Has to be conditional. Well, I mean,
and it has to be
not random. They said deterministic, not random game state. Fair enough. And I suppose then you would argue that the Monopoly one is random. It's conditional.
I mean, the counterexample on Board Game Geek is simply that there's no condition. Like, the example for a condition would be if you own one or more properties. But then we get into Agricola, and on Agricola, when you're adding stuff to the sides, that's not conditional at all.
Yes. Deterministic. Well, you see, this is interesting, because one of the things I had thought of that might be automatic resource growth was Tolkien, the bit where when you move the cogs in Tolkien, if nobody has taken the start player space, then you put another corn on the center. Now that is automatic resource growth of some type, isn't it? Because that keeps growing, and then when you take the start player, you get all that corn.
That certainly would seem to fit for me. And why do you think it's not mentioned? I mean,
it's not mentioned.
It's not tagged.
It's not resources held by a player, so it wouldn't meet the book definition, but it might meet the BGG definition.
I mean, What, if you were talking about automatic resource growth, what would you automatically, what definition do you think is more useful? And I guess we'll have to explore this as we go through.
Yeah.
If you had to be the arbitrator of how
Yeah.
words are being used by everyone forevermore, how would you choose for this phrase to be used?
Yes, the book definition is very, very, very tightly defined in the sense that it's resources held by a player will automatically grow over time. That why restrict it to that? If you have it as the BGG one, automatic increase of resource triggered by something. I think that's a slightly wider definition and might be more helpful. It doesn't require the resources to be actually held by a player. Then you have to define what does held by a player mean? Is that in their private stock or is that owned by a player? So I think that you may be right. It may be that BGG have gone with a slightly more developed and possibly more useful definition rather than the book one. And I'd be interested in what Geoffrey Engelstein and Isaac Shalev have to say about that. It'd be interesting just to find out.
For sure. I think that let's crack on and let's give some examples.
Yep.
Let's start with Brittania.
Okay. This is probably one of the simplest examples. Brittania is a conquering the map game where you have tribes of invaders of the British Isles, and it goes through a long period, 1,000 years, I think, of history, more or less. And you have different tribes. Your side, one color in this case, like red, will have different tribes which appear in different places in the British Isles. Now, the way we have automatic resource growth here is that at the start of the round, or is it the start of the turn, actually? I think, sorry, the start of the turn of each tribe, you count up the number of areas that tribe controls, and you get an extra piece, army, if you like, for every 3 areas that you control. Now, there are some nuances. So Highland areas are only half a piece. And the major nuance is that the counter limit of each tribe is strictly adhered to. And some tribes are very much smaller than others. So, for example, the Caledonians are right in the far north of Scotland. They have, I think, something like only 6 pieces. So they can't grow more than that. Whereas somebody like the Saxons, who are red, have a very large number of pieces and can grow very, very extensively and have quite a large area. The other restriction they place on this is that when you put armies into play, you can only put a limited number in. You can only put 1 in each area, so you have to control quite a lot of areas to get a big lot of growth. And you have to have enough areas to support all the pieces that you have in play. And I think it's something like each area can support 2 pieces. So what we've got there is a tight linkage.
So there's a lot of constraints on how it grows.
Yes.
But the placement of how these things are placed is up to you.
Yes, the placement of where they go. They'll just have to be placed in an area that you own. And in the game, you can only move from one area to an adjacent area. So it's quite constrained in terms of, I think, actually, is it one area? Well, it's very limited the amounts of movement you can do. I think the Romans can move further because they have roads and things like that. But there are some differences. But the point here is that the resource growth it gives you, well, very clearly, population pressure. That's what it's about. So it forces players to make decisions about where they're going to put their expanding tribe, if it is expanding, unless it's been crushed. And that gives you a lot of good strategic and tactical decision points as you're playing the game. So, for example, if you're playing the Saxons, which is red, and you're also playing the Brigantes, who are also red, you don't want those areas you don't want to be in the same areas, because each tribe is effectively hostile to the other tribe. So you have to manage where your population goes, and that's part of that population growth issue.
So what determines the number that you get to place?
The number of areas that your tribe controls. So if you control 6 areas, you get one extra piece per 3 areas. So you'd get 2 pieces. Now, interestingly,
so if you control 5 areas,
yeah,
then you'd only get 1.
You get 1, but there is carryover. Carryover is recorded at the you see the bit at the top of the picture there, some of that orange bit. That's recording carryover between rounds for.
So you actually get
you get fractions. Yes. So
interesting.
So, for example, if you've run out of pieces because they're all on the board, you keep the carryover. So you'll just leave your marker at the maximum carryover, and then if you have a piece killed off, you will get that piece back again in the very next turn because you'll have all that carryover ready to do it.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like
really tightly. It's very tightly engineered so that you've got a given amount of pressure on population depending on the tribe you've got. So the Saxons and the Angles have got a lot of pieces, and the Romans, and they're expected to have large areas conquered, and they'll get commensurately large numbers of points. So each of the colors, and if it's a 4-player game, you're playing a color. So one person's blue, one person's red, one person's purple, etc. Each player will have control of some large tribes and some small tribes, and you're balancing out how to manipulate the land coverage of each of those tribes in relation to each other on your side and in relation to the ones of your opponents.
So just to summarize, it sounds like there's a small amount of growth. I mean, it's very chunky. You're probably likely to get 1 or 2, but then how that feeds into the decisions is that once you get this growth, you're right away thinking, where is this going to be placed? And that growth allows for an extra decision point.
Yes. I mean, the main decision point in Brittania is actually not the population growth itself, but there are massive invasions. So your tribe will usually start with a large injury.
Other things going on,
but these are
decision points.
These are extra decision points as you're expanding and as you're trying to defend your territories.
And can we contrast that with Civilization?
Yes, indeed, because this is the old Harlan Trefoil Tresham design, which I've played quite a lot of back in the day. Now, one of the reasons I love this game a lot is it has a similar type of population growth. So here, if you've got one piece in an area, then in the round you put an extra token in. So if it's got 1 token already in there, you get an extra token. If you've got 2 or more tokens, you get 2 extra tokens. So there is, and when you've got, I think it's 6 or 7 tokens, you can take all those tokens off and put a city in. And the objective.
And the circular thing is a city, is that right?
The circular thing there is a city, and the square tokens are population tokens. But the really beautiful thing about this game is the tokens are also used as money. So, and there's a limit in it. You have 56, it's written into my heart, that 56 tokens, and they are used for both population and for taxation, so for money. Now, the problem is, as you put pieces, if you overexpand, so if you spread out and expand massively, then you won't have enough tokens in stock to pay for taxing your city. So at the start of each round, you have to put 2 tokens per city from your stock into your taxation. You flip them over and put them into your taxation. Now, they're coming from your stock, not from the board. So if you've got loads and loads of population on the board, you won't have enough tokens in your stock to tax your cities, which means the cities revolt. And you can lose cities. So the game is not about simply Brittania is relatively straightforward in that you just expand as much as you can and you fight the other people. So it's fairly straightforward. In Civilization, you have to balance where your tokens are at every point in the game. Some of them will be on the board. Some of them have to be in stock so you can tax. Some of them are in your treasury, effectively as money, but you'll need to spend them so you can circulate them back onto the board for further expansion. And that is the one of the most beautiful parts of the Civilization game, is that multiple use of a finite resource in such an elegant way. So, for sometimes you want to have a lot of pieces on the board because you need to expand. Other times you want to have enough pieces on the board so that you can maintain your cities, and you need to have 2 tokens per city just to maintain your cities. But you don't necessarily want any more, because you want those back in your treasury or in your stock so you can continue with the taxing. So there's wonderful balances in that design that force you to handle your tokens in a strategic way. You don't just do it. You don't just automatically expand like you might do with Brittania.
Yeah, that seems like a really interesting tension going there. And good morning to you, Tony, who says Sail to India by Hisashi Hayashi, who I think is best known for String Railways, does limited resources in different zones really well in a tiny footprint. I have to admit, I'm not super familiar with that one. Are you, Alan?
I'm not either. Sorry, no.
But let us know how that one works. The other thing that I wanted to give a shout out to is obviously, let's change the banner, Agricola. So there's 2 things going on here. Firstly, the animals, and secondly, these cards. So I think that these cards are a really interesting one. I mean, obviously, this is only from the Board Game Geek definition because they are not player controlled. But what this does is every turn, for example, the 1 cattle, you will put down 1 cattle every turn on that card, whether one has been taken before or not. And so this means that if people are, this gives a bit of a game of chicken almost. How much cattle is worth taking? How much is it worth? And you've got similar things for all the other resources like reeds. And so at a certain point, it might be like, well, this isn't worth it, but oh, that feels worth it. And it allows the players to decide what numbers are worth, which I think makes it a lot more interactive. And I think that really adds to the delicious tension that is prevalent in Agricola. The other thing that I want to note is the animals, which here are represented by cubes. And if you've got more than 1 animal, basically, they breed. And so if you've got 2, then they can have baby. If you've got 4, they can still only have 1 baby.
1 baby. It's slightly counted, but
well,
no, it has to be. It has to be like that. Otherwise, you just get overrun. Yeah. And this is the book definition. Resources held by a player.
And in here, you do have to make space for these babies. I mean, unless you want to just slaughter it for meat straight away, I guess, which is something that you can do in the game, where a young calf will give you exactly the same amounts of food as a fully grown cow, which is again a little bit strange. But of course, all games are abstractions. But I do like this thing of, hey, I've got this, and I think what this does is empower the player, give them a feeling of, okay, there's this threshold to strive for, because otherwise I might be happy just having the 1 cow because that's what's going to give me the most points, because, the first cow I think gives you like 2 points, and then the second cow only gives you like 1 point. I can't remember the exact numbers, but something like that. The first one gives you more, but then the second one gives you this big bonus that now you start getting things going on. So it makes you think, oh, maybe I'm going to wait and I'm going to go into the thing that I've already committed to, which is quite exciting.
Yes, I think that
Agricola.
We like Grick. We like Grick. We do. The interesting thing about the cards bit, the earlier pictures you had there, is that this is quite common, isn't it, in a lot of games? Basically, this is bribing the players. Oh, come on! You can correct us, Tony. We don't mind. But we can. The game bribes you to take that particular action, that's very common in quite a lot of games with resources in them. The designer wants people to take all the actions that are available. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to bribe players by adding more resources. So
making it constantly more and more worthwhile.
Yeah. So if you think one sheep isn't enough, which usually isn't, then another sheep will turn up next turn, and then player order becomes really important, because if you know, particularly if you have wood, I think if you have wood, it accumulates rapidly. So if you need wood, and most players will need wood at some point, then you want to be able to be the first player to pick that wood off, and that will push players towards taking the start player action. So that tightly locking those resource growths into player order, will stimulate people to make those really tough decisions.
And yes, I want to note that I've just realized this is not technically automatic resource growth as defined by Board Game Geek either, because it's not conditional. You get a new
That's true. It isn't
thing
conditional
on all of these, and that's slightly counterintuitive to me.
Conditional is they've even italicized conditional.
But I think that this sort of non-conditional automatic resource growth is such a big thing. I don't know if it's explored.
It's interesting. They do the example is the example 1 on the description: unacquired resources in Agricola, uncollected wood from the wood collection action space. Condition: will offer +1 wood on the following round. So the condition is that it's uncollected wood. So if you collect, I'm not convinced.
Feels like a weird way of putting it, because you're always placing one thing. So sure, the final number is conditional on all the other actions you've taken, but you're always adding one new thing there. And whether it goes from 0 to 1, and sure, it will stay at the 1, and the condition for it being at 3 is that people haven't taken it for 2 turns.
No. I think if you look at the wood in Agricola, if it's been collected, you get, I think, 3 wood placed. It doesn't just increment. I think you get 3 wood. The sheep increment just by 1, always. But I think that it's uncollected wood increments by 1, whereas if it's been collected, it just restocks, which isn't technically exactly the same. This is a bit esoteric.
About sail to India, and I will quickly look up the rules.
All right, so you have a limited number of cubes that will either be agents, ships, colonies, special abilities, and importantly, VP tracker. Okay. And this is a limited number of cubes, which is used to be all of those things. Right. So you need to, a bit like Through the Ages, representing having the blue cubes representing any type of resource, be it the resources you spend on buildings or the resources you have for food. So you might want to give things up. I love the idea that you might want to give up ships so that you can track more points. That's quite an interesting implementation of that, having points as another resource, in contrast, or using the same components as the other resources. That seems like quite a nice idea. I like with Civilization, I like this tight coupling and reuse of the components of the game to make people take difficult decisions. So here, if you've got as Tony says, if you have lots of ships, you want to use lots of ships, but that stops you doing something else. So there's always an opportunity cost through having the same resource used for 2 or more different things. You're right.
And yes, I just checked the rules, and thanks for confirming. Tony says the restock depends on a given space. There are, of course, various versions of wood, and it will be +1, +2, +3. Others used player count versions. So yes, if you look,
Yes.
it just says you put whatever it says, and you're getting that same amount every turn. So on the
I see.
free wood, you place free wood on that space each round. So sure.
So it's not really condition.
It isn't. I don't understand why it. Yeah, it's. I mean, if, for example, if you had a certain number of wood, that certain number would be conditional on you not having collected the wood for a certain number of turns. But you put the same number no matter what.
So it's not conditional. There is no condition
at all.
It's not conditional, is it? No.
I mean,
how very odd.
Yeah. So actually, as we ponder, I think that we need to examine this. I mean, yeah, Tony, would you agree that this is not conditional? What are your thoughts? And Matt, who's watching, and everyone else who's watching, and what are your thoughts? I mean, I don't see how this could be considered conditional at all.
It's interesting. So, well, we've come up with some interesting little quirks in definition here.
Anyway, should we move on? Because I don't want this to be. I want this to be a 1-hour episode in theory.
Yes, we should move on for sure.
So, we've talked a lot about this already, but how does it impact a game? How will it affect the experience at the table? And Tony says it's conditional based on what's printed on the card or board space.
Oh, well.
No, then you can say it's conditional based on the rules. Like I am the fact that I got that I was allowed to draw a picture in this game was conditional on me. No, I don't think he gets.
No, I don't think so. I don't think you can get off a hook like that.
No.
Anyway, let's not get too tendentious about this.
I think that if it is automatic resource growth as defined by the book, by which it means it's something that's in your possession and it's something that you have to do, and also it is conditional, and so we're kind of mixing the two together, then it generally means that you've got to strive for that condition. It gives you something to aim for, like the pigs.
Yes. Automatic resource growth ought to mean that it happened automatically. Kind of. So if there's a condition, especially if it's a very restrictive condition, then it's not automatic, is it?
Well, I mean, there's always I think that
it can be dependent on a game state.
True non-conditional resource growth, which would be just saying, okay, you get a certain amount of income at the start of every turn. That would be Chocolate Factory, where it says, okay, at the end of, I can't remember the exact numbers, even though I developed this one, but I think I'm just plucking these numbers from the air. In the starts of the first round, you get this many coal. At the start of second round, I'm not even saying numbers. You get slightly more at the start of first, and so you know exactly how much coal you will be getting, and you get exactly that much coal to run your engine. Now, that sort of non-conditional resource growth means that it's going to guide you and push a very certain arc through the game.
I think that would be called that would be called income, and there is income as a mechanism. So we're differentiating automatic resource growth from income, and I think we do need to differentiate those two for sure. Otherwise things will get very, very
kilos. You get 2 coins plus 1 per townhouse you control. That feels conditional, because you've got to control the townhouse, and then you get the thing.
So the 2 coins is income, and the 1 per townhouse is automatic resource growth.
Because it's conditional.
Maybe that is the way to look at it.
I'm not sure what this symbol in the middle means.
Not equal to. Income is not the same as automatic resource growth, is what Tony's saying. And I think that's right. And the impact on if we're looking at the impact on the game, if you've got this conditional automatic resource growth, the impact on the game is it creates more decision points. So in income, there's no decision point. You just get your income. But if you have to do something, or you have to manipulate the game state so that some condition is there in order to get more stuff, then you're impacting how people play the game in order to get that extra stuff. So, for example, if you're looking at Civilization, in order to get large amounts of population growth, which allows you to expand more and build more cities, you have to put your pieces in more areas, because you'll grow more. And then once you've grown, you then move them, collect them together, and then you crystallize out the cities. I think you need 6 or 7, I can't remember. And you take those off. And when you take them off and create a city, they go back into your stock, and then you've got them for use elsewhere. So there's a whole range of different decisions you're making simply because the condition is your population growth is 1 extra for 1 token in an area, 2 tokens for more than 2 tokens in an area, and you're manipulating how you play on the board in order to usually maximize your growth at certain points. So that's what it does. The impact on the game is creating strategic and tactical decision points for players. That's how I would read it. And it's similar to Agricola. If you know that if you have 2 cattle, you get an extra one for free, then you have to, if you want to take advantage of that, you have to get 2 cattle. So you have to take specific actions to get 2 cattle in order to earn an extra one. And so it's not just income where you just get it willy-nilly. You have to actually take a specific action in order to do it.
I will begrudgingly agree that it does add tactics and strategy, but it feels like basically any mechanism that you add to a game is probably going to add that, in a sense.
Well, obviously it's contextual. I mean, the reason I go on about Civilization is because it's so interlocked in everything. Everything you do in that game is so interlocked with how you manage those 56 tokens that it's so elegant. That's why it was always been one of my favorite games.
I feel like if strategic games are basically about how best do you jump through these hoops, because when you start playing a game, it's like, okay, this is what we're doing, this is what we have to do, and this is a whole bunch of hoops that you have to jump through. Of course, having another thing that gives you another knob to fiddle with, it's another hoop to jump through, potentially another thing to think about. But I will say that what I think this really brings to the game, conditional automatic resource growth, is that it brings a moment of feeling of achievement. It's like, hey, hooray, I managed to get my animals. I managed to get another sheep. I managed to get not only another sheep, but also this other thing. And I'm feeling good about myself. And it gives you a moment to almost celebrate, I would argue.
Certainly, that I would agree that in most forms of this automatic resource growth, there's definitely an I've done something moment. I'm a bit cautious. I'm a bit cautious about that, because in Civilization, sometimes, if you've got all your tokens on the board, you're stuffed. You don't want to have all the tokens on the board. So there are dangers in that.
I think
so it's all
having a finite number of tokens and saying there's a danger of it is really interesting. And it feels like it's almost subverting the expectation with the automatic resource growth to say, hey, this is good. How can we make sure that it's sometimes bad? And I think that's an interesting thing in games where, hey, income could be good, but let's make it so that if you ever get too much money, then the police come in and raid you, and then you lose the game.
You've got to bear in mind that this is a civilization building game, so it fits with the theme in that if you overpopulate your civilization, if you've got too many people doing the agriculture and not urbanizing, the idea is that therefore those people become impoverished, and meaning you can't tax your cities because you haven't got tokens in your stock. So those people, you're destroying your cities because you've got too many people out there in the countryside and not enough people actually in your cities. So the cities are collapsing because you haven't got enough wealth to support them. You've got a load of impoverished peasants, but not enough people in the cities.
Tony wants to give a couple of other examples.
Yeah.
Firstly, I don't know if I agree with this, but Tony says you could regard the cost of feeding your family as a form of automatic resource growth, albeit an outgoing one, because the more family you have, the more food you need. And it's interesting to think about this cost, but I think that is a different thing that we'll get to later. And Tony says, what about triggered automatic resource growth? For example, Concordia, when someone else's prefects a region in which you have a city, and then you get resources from their action. I mean,
that's interesting because that is triggered by a particular conditional, deterministic, not random game state. So that does feel like automatic resource growth. Getting resources from somebody else's action. I wonder if that's actually got a different
and it's still
mechanism name.
deterministic in as much as it's not based on any dice roll, but
Tony gets a gold star for that one. Yay.
But yeah, it definitely triggering the growth based on someone else's actions is an interesting thing to consider. Let's talk about how versatile it is. Like, I don't know if there's like most of these, of course, there's a lower limit on how simple games can be and still have this mechanism. I don't think this is something you could put into, for example, Yogi without overcomplicating it.
Well, it has to be a game with resources in it, so that cuts out quite a lot of games.
I mean,
and often it will be a game with.
You could consider your limbs to be resources, but the problem is that you can't grow actual.
I don't think you don't get automatic growth. No, I think that so it's got to have resources, and ideally it'll be something with action selection or with worker placement. And interestingly, player order, because you want to have in the design some conditions that are under at least some elements of player control, because it has to be conditional. So
I don't know if I'd agree that there has to be turn order. I think that with a simultaneous action game, you could absolutely have automatic resource growth.
You could, yes, but you want to have a situation where players can take advantage of that automatic resource growth, which is either by owning the resources which are growing, or by having access to gaining those resources if they're growing on the board. I think that's what I'm saying. So you could see that it would integrate quite well with player order, because that would be a mechanism. If you have variable player order, it will give you opportunities to grab like in Agricola, grab start player, in order to take advantage of a resource area which has grown. That's
actually a really good point. I mean, that although non-conditional, again, resource growth in the middle of the board does work really well with player order. What do we call that? The non-conditional automatic resource growth in the middle of the board? Because does that have a name?
It's kind of, it's not quite income, is it? Because
no, it's yeah, I don't know what that is.
I don't know. We haven't covered it. I don't know.
I mean, I wonder if we need to make these things slightly later and see if we can get Geoffrey or Isaac Shalev to come on.
Yeah, be helpful. Well, I mean, it depends on the conditional. I mean, a lot of those. Are you thinking of an? I
don't think that changing turn order messes with that. I don't see why. I honestly don't understand why having two pigs or 2 cattle or 2 whatever, or having a set number of cities on the board, or having a set number of population, or I don't understand why any of that has anything to do with taking turns. I think that, sure.
No, it can. All I think was, no, obviously, if it's your stuff that is growing, if it's resources held by a player, then obviously the player order is not that important. If it's the BGG definition, then you can see as how that would be, could be linked quite neatly. But it's the conditional bit which is a bit tricky.
He asks, what about the cubes from the bag into Snowdonia's stockyard? And hopefully you know this one better than I do. Every round you get more, but the usable ones depend on what's been drawn. So, hashtag Shill Zone Game. Hashtag the Baggart. Hashtag what's going up to now?
Is it condition? Is that a condition? Yes, I suppose that is a condition, isn't it? Well, it could be another one, Tony. It possibly meets the BGG definition, but not the book definition. It's a particular conditional, deterministic, not random game state. Well, it is, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it happens at a specific part in the round order. It's conditional in the sense that it depends what's in the bag and what is actually drawn.
I mean, it's an automatic increase, but exactly how it increases is randomized.
Yes. So you could argue it's not random. Well, yeah, I
that up there without comment.
Yeah, I think that the definition on BGG is seems to be very tightly defined in terms of the words used, but we're not absolutely convinced that it's clear enough to be really,
this is my least favorite mechanism in terms of definition so far. Yeah. This is the worst of the A's.
But then we don't care too much about definitions. It's how they're implemented that really matters, I think.
So let's carry on. We've decided that, fundamentally, you need to have stuff, and there needs to be enough of a strategy so that you can say, okay, this is the hoop you jump through, and people need to be able to make decisions to get to that point. Like if I was just going to roll some stuff, and if it was just a roll and move game, and then I rolled and then I collected the animal on which I got, and then I got a pair of the same thing, then I started getting more. I mean, that feels like an extraneous Italy bookkeeping on what is probably like a game for very small people.
I think we're saying that player decisions must impact how this works. Otherwise, why is it there, really? I mean, otherwise it would be just random. We want it to be not random.
Would you agree that in basically any midweight strategy game or above, this is something you could consider?
Oh yes, I think so. Anything with resources in it, you could certainly consider this. Particularly if you're bribing. If you're bribing the players to take specific actions that otherwise they wouldn't take, and that's quite key, I think.
Have we used it in any games? I've not used it in any of my. I've not used it in any of my published or any of my prototypes. I don't think.
I don't think I have either. Although if the Snowdonia bag counts, then I think we have. But I'm not sure about that one. I may have used it.
I feel like Snowdonia, but like these edge examples of resources are automatic and it's conditional, but then you get a random allocation of the resources. These kind of edge cases are surely the most interesting things and the most worth exploring. So I think that, the example of Concordia, the example of Snowdonia, these are the things that it's really worth pondering.
Yes, because I think we found some of the most interesting things in the whole of this series have been ones that don't quite meet the definitions. People are obviously, when you're designing, you're not saying I'm going to use this particular mechanism necessarily. You just put something in, and if it happens to be that mechanism or a version of it, then that's great. But classification comes after design, I think. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that last week I actually invented a auction game, and the first time we played it, it was turn order until pass. The second time, like, I made it once around, and people were saying, it doesn't feel like an auction anymore, because, which is very interesting, even though it's listed as a type of auction on BGG, it doesn't feel like an auction. But then I'm actually thinking of moving away, and I think the value of all these mechanisms is that they give you starting points. And
Yes.
you can say, hey, I'm using this, but with this twist and that twist. And that's the really valuable thing to my mind. Or alternatively, just being able to combine different things that maybe haven't been combined yet. I mean, by having words, we are able to then think about things in a more insightful way, I believe.
Indeed, yes. And I think hence all our discussions about auctions and how they were different, how people rethought auctions, really stretch the limits of what auctions were, and you can actually see really interesting new things developing off all those varieties of auctions. Yeah.
Tony says leeching off other folks' resource collection is a lovely interaction spur. I mean, that's so if you are kind of benefiting based on what they have, that's
yes,
truly really interesting. Not is that's in any games, but let's go back and say, when is it good? Who would enjoy it? I think that when you want a minor sense of achievement in the overall arc of the game, because you can't just have, okay, we do stuff and then at the end of the game we get points. You want to feel like, okay, middle of the game, hey, I managed to place this fence. Why do I keep talking about Agricola? Or hey, I managed to make this pond, or hey, I finally managed to build this house, or I finally managed to bioengineer this space cat.
Or I managed to grow enough population in order to build this new city, like in Civilization.
Like,
that's
these
the kind of thing.
milestones are a really meaningful thing to have in your way. And so then saying, okay, at certain points, we check to see if something has happened. And if that has happened, then I get stuff. And so by making it non-conditional, you don't feel any sense of achievement to it.
No,
but
exactly.
by
If
making
it's
it
just income, it's not.
Especially if it's conditional based on stuff that you've achieved, then it feels like, hey, I made this happen. I've got my happy wee sheep. I've got my happy pigs. Whatever.
So it means that really, because we're talking about games with resources in them, then it's going to be medium, at least a medium weight game. It's not going to be necessarily a very, very light short game. It's hard to see how that would work in a light short game. So we're really looking at medium weight and greater for this type of.
I mean, a light short game. I think this would have to be the main thing, but that does sound like a challenge.
We always have those challenges. Yes. Who would enjoy it? Well.
When is it bad? What issues might there be? Let's talk about why we can't add it to a light game. I think the obvious issues are that it needs to be I'm going to say one problem with it potentially is slippery slope. Like if you were to just, for example, get double your stuff, then that's ridiculous. I mean,
it has to be done carefully. If you go back to Agricola, if you were adding 2 sheep instead of 1 sheep
for having them free, or if it was like 1 sheep per pair,
or one animal per pair, then that's overloading it. It's making that too powerful as a mechanism, and it would overwhelm. It would become the overwhelming part. The only way I can win this game is to do that. And you don't want it has to
then it's really forcing you down these narrow avenues. Then it would feel like, okay, once you've committed to this, you are locked into this. Whereas actually by having it just be 2 animals, that means that, okay, you've achieved this, but there's still time in the game to go and do the other things. It's not just pushing one thing as much as you can.
Well, I think this question, most of the times when we've addressed this, when is it bad, what issues might there be, is you have to do it carefully and contextually within the rest of the design. It has to fit properly. And can we think of any bad examples automatic resource growth.
I mean, I don't want
I'm not
to
sure. I don't know. I don't want to diss particular games, but
I don't think that I can. But again, this is because these issues are caught, and maybe if it were to be bad, then it would be removed. But of course, it's contextual. Of course, it's just about, okay, what do we need to consider? What do we need to think about? And hello, Yoda, thank you for coming. But yes, what issues might there be is the key point. And so if it's too generous, then, or if it pushes you too far down particular avenues, then it's your earliest decisions kind of railroad you potentially for the rest of the game.
I mean, if you look at Brittania as an example, and how carefully this is implemented, population growth in Brittania, you have a maximum of 1 piece you can add per area. So, I mean, now that is obviously guarding against that problem. If you say you were getting 4 pieces in the turn, if you could put them all into one area, that means that you could overwhelm a particular border of your conquered land, adjacent to your conquered land, and that might unbalance the game totally, because it would mean that you could very simply concentrate much more rapidly than anybody could deal with it, and it would turn it into more like a game of Risk than
where
what
you
Britannia is, whereas you don't really want
make
that.
a stronghold.
So that's when it might be bad. If you mishandle it in that way, it can overstress the rest of the game system if it's handled not sensitively enough.
I mean, Risk is actually a really interesting example. I don't think that's listed. I might be wrong.
No. Oh God, is it? Is that automatic resource generation? I don't know. Is it automatic resource growth? Because oh God, I can't remember.
Because if you have
you play card, you play
an entire continent, you get stuff.
It's not. Oh yes, because you normally play cards, don't you? Play sets of cards to get more.
No, but like for the continents,
for the continent, you get them.
Exclusive use.
That's true.
Control over a continent.
Conditional. It's definitely conditional.
I think again, the issue is just that it's undertagged, so it's got as its mechanism area movement, dice rolling, player elimination, set collection. Whereas
it's very limited.
Stuff going on.
It clearly has other things going on it. Yeah, it's true.
And this is the eternal problem with not everything being tagged. But I think Risk is interesting because this is actually a fairly simple, hey, if you've got unique control of this stuff, then you get more stuff, and that feels like a major thing, and everyone can see it coming, and it's very chunky, and that feels like a good starting point where you could maybe even reduce the complexity of it in other places.
Well, if you can compare that directly with Britannia, because Britannia is in some ways a very Risk-like game. It has the same more or less the same combat mechanism as Risk, but if there's a problem with Risk, it avoids the problem of Risk where you can have over concentration on one front, which means that Australia is where you start from, and the strategic decisions you make are relatively straightforward. With Britannia, they're much more difficult because you can't do that concentration that you can do in Risk. You have to be your tribes are spread out because that's the only way you can keep those pieces on the board at all. So you're more constrained, and there are more interesting both strategic and tactical choices to make in Britannia than there are in Risk. Whereas Risk is much more straightforward.
An example, I think that Risk might be a bad example where, I mean, it depends, obviously.
Well, it's a different game, really, yes.
But I think that it does have that slippery slope element, which you could argue is needed to actually bring the game towards an end. But at the same time, if you do find that slippery slope problem, which I think that most modern gamers would, and I think that it's kind of antithetical when combined with the player elimination to even non-gamers' palettes, I would argue that actually Britannia, by forcing you to disperse stuff, does deal with that in an interesting way. But I
Yes.
think that having the trigger points of you need to get this exact shape to get that stuff is really interesting. And it reminds me of Go Nuts for Donuts and Sushi Go, where you've got the set collection, but it's for the sashimi, it's 0 for 1, 0 for
Yes.
2, and 10 for
And
free.
yes.
Similar
Yes.
for one of the Go Nuts for Donuts, where by having certain jumping off points where, hey, one more doesn't give me anything, one more still doesn't give me anything,
But it's on the road. It's
it
on the yes.
gives
Yeah.
you that excitement, and it gives you that, something that I think works really well, especially in lighter games when you want to bring about some emotional reaction. Let's have those big trigger points.
Yes. I agree. Well, I mean, even in something like Agricola, if you've engineered a situation where you can get a large amount of resources in one go, but I mean, it's particularly wood, isn't it? Really, then it does feel like a triumph if you get 9 wood in one go because you engineered it that way somehow. That is a really big
Again, we're talking about
achievement.
that, even though we are not sure whether it's conditional or not.
Well, yes.
And that's like, I mean, it almost feels like it reminds me of a Dutch auction in some ways.
Oh,
That
really?
kind of, hey, you're getting
Yes.
more, you're getting more, you're getting more. At what point is it worth you spending one action to get all this stuff?
Yeah. Well, Dutch auction is coming down, of course.
But
Yes, I know what you
Dutch
mean.
auction, the price is coming down, the
So the
value
value is going.
stays put. Here, the price, one action, stays put,
That's the same,
and
but
then the value continues to
Yeah.
escalate. And I don't know, how you would term this. So, yeah, I think we have to investigate this one a little bit more and do a follow-up, maybe.
I think we need to talk to the guys. We need to talk to the guys because they've obviously thought about it.
Yeah.
See what we
So
can
at this point, a slightly unsatisfying end, but let's
continue.
start to wrap up. Alan, do you have a question for everyone?
Well, actually, I'm not sure if I've asked this before, but my question is, what is your favorite?
Here's a little question before we go on our way. Question of today.
Sorry, I interrupted your.
No.
Right, okay. What is your favorite game mechanism and why? I mean, you may not have one, but if you do have one, what is it and why do you have that as a favorite?
Or alternatively, what's your favorite family of game mechanisms?
Yes. I personally don't have one. Well, I do. My favorite game mechanism is the one that fits into the game I'm currently designing, which is a complete cheat. I know. It's a complete cop out, but yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I think that's skimming through all the things. My favorite game mechanism is maybe real time or simultaneous action selection, just because I like not waiting for my turn.
I think my favorite mechanisms tend to be anything involving cards because they're so I know that's another cop out, but they're so flexible that anything involving cards is just
Matt
really
says,
interesting.
I'm partial to a nice deck builder. My love for the Tale of Merchant series is well known. I just like the idea of building up to something over time. Yeah, engine building of all sorts does have that. And of course, in deck building, it's not just engine building, but you've got usually quite a bit of control over what goes into it. So it almost feels like you've done something that's uniquely yours. Whereas whilst there's engine building in photosynthesis, it's not uniquely yours in the way that deck building is. So it kind of feels like that mixture of growth plus personalization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it links to. I mean, card. I just like the idea of playing a card. I mean, the great thing about playing a card, and it can be an action card or it can be an ace of spades, whatever. It's got tactile. I'm playing this card, and the card can have pictures and it can have text. It can be multi-action cards. And those I like possibly most probably. So that's what I go for. Because they're so flexible. I mean, you can even have it that you tear it up when you've done it, if you want.
All the people out there, over to you. What are you up to? You can share Botany if you want to. What are you up to today? Tell me something that you want to do, that you need to do. Please share. I promise I care. I am going to make sure to do a bit of the, general taking care of myself stuff, to be honest. Make sure that I eat something that's relatively nutritious, shower, brush teeth, all that sorts of stuff. And I am meeting with someone in just under an hour who might, I'm trying to interview some people for possibly moving in
Right.
my place.
Good.
And helping me is the plan. And we'll see whether we get on or not. I do have some admin things, one of which I could probably do hopefully before that, which is just to order 300 envelopes. 300 is a good number.
300 is a large number.
I mean, I post my own Kickstarter stuff, remember,
right,
and I do have stuff coming over. So yeah, I need some more envelopes. About maybe 400 would also be a good number. But anyway, I mean, 200 is too few, and 500 is probably too many. Yeah. So 300 or 400. And
I'm prepping for UK Games Expo a bit. I've been working on some promos for Expo. I mean, what we're looking at is some play aid cards for Ming Voyages and a tiny little expansion for Cousins War. I mean, I'm not sure that they're both going to come off, but I'm hopeful that they will. So that'll be interesting. And then I'm also looking at adding more examples to all of the Three Sanchos rules, but primarily UK Games Expo. If you drop into our stand, hopefully you will have some promo stuff that you can get your hands on for Ming Voyages and Cousins War.
I still have to finish off some stuff for UK Games Expo that's meant to be printed, and I also have to look at all the files for Last Bug Standing in
yes, please.
And other than that, what are you up to? Please, while I recap and wrap up before we finish up, we talked about the 1000th Busy Beats and Board Game Bladder show, where most of the people have already replied to say, yes, it sounds good, and might have like one potential dropout. We'll see. Because of travel and bad times. We talked about puzzles. We talked about doing new Kickstarters coming. We talked about, the edges of those puzzles being a bit complicated to do. We talked about nature and growth and the beauty of growth being very contextual. I mean, what's good from one perspective, I mean, from the perspective of the virus, it's very good for it to grow. Whereas from the perspective of the humans, not so much. We talked about definitions and how definitions can sometimes be shaky. We talked through Agricola, Civilisation, Brittania, and Tony made a lot of excellent comments like Sail to India and Concordia, which I've not played Sail to India, but talking about Kalis and a lot of things about, hey, what if it was a random income, which is an interesting almost twist in Snowdonia, and all these edge cases, which I think are worth exploring when you start to define, okay, what is this actually? We talked about how it adds more strategy and tactical decisions. Obviously, you do need resources to be in the game, but resources are basically anything. I mean, resources could be cards in hand. Resources could be extra actions. It could be
victory points.
If you've got this, then you get a bonus action. I mean, you could argue that that's a resource.
Indeed. Or victory points can be a resource, yeah.
And the point is that it's got to be something that people have strived for, people achieve, and people then feel like, yes, I got it, and let folk take advantage of it. The downside is that it might railroad you into certain things, especially if you No, I mean, when I look at risk, it does kind of railroad you into stuff a little bit. Like once you've started off down that path of, okay, this is my continent, you've got to stick with it.
Yes, but that's the game. I mean, that's the kind of purpose of risk, though. I mean, it's difficult to be critical of that when that's the whole game. The whole game is about that's my bit, and I need these cards, therefore I have to do these. I mean, yeah. It's difficult.
Yes.
It's difficult to criticize risk for forcing people to over-concentrate when that's the whole point of the game. Yes.
But I mean, you have to decide for yourself, is this something that you want to do? And, you know, it kind of means that, yeah, it's kind of reminds me of a splotter in some ways, that you make those early decisions and that can win or lose you the game, except obviously it's also got all this dice rolling, that a bit more dice rolling than I would maybe expect in Splotterspiel. But anyway, we talked about other stuff that we love. I love not having to take turns. Matt loves deck building. And then at this point, just want to say, share, spread the word. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And if you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bez in all of the places. And stuffbybez.com/streams will tell you that tomorrow I'm chatting with Kirsten Lunde. And like it'll tell you all about the stuff.
And we're strictly within the 1 hour limit, obviously. Again, Bez, as usual.
And if you want to check out Alan, where can you check out Alan?
I'm here. I'm Alan at alanpaul.co.uk or Alan at surprisetogames.co.uk. I'm Bentham Fish on Twitter, and I have a blog on surprisetogames.co.uk as well, if you want to subscribe to that as well.
And I think the only thing left for us to say at this point is lots of love and bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, bye, everyone.